Hello, everyone. So Riverpod 2.0. Yeah, it should be coming around later this month, new release for Riverpod. But you see, in this talk, we probably won't be talking about Riverpod 2.0 that much, which you might find a bit weird, because you see, the changelog for the 2.0 release is a bit boring. Like, I could talk to you about the new utilities for providers, or how in the 2.0 release, the default behavior for doing a pull to refresh has been proved to be more online with what typical applications expect to avoid double loading states. But I mean, sure, these changes are interesting, but make a complete talk about it, like some of you would be bored to death. So let's do something a bit different today. I'm going to use this amazing opportunity created by Magic for us to talk about some broader announcements for the Riverpod community. So first of all, I want to give some special thanks to Tim, Valentin, and Adson, who helped me build a dev tool for the Riverpod ecosystem that I'm going to show you. So the first one is a state inspector for Riverpod, where you would soon be able to inspect the state of your providers and edit their value, like the provider dev tool. Custom lint rules for Riverpod to highlight potential user mistakes you made and have some quick fixes and maybe refactorings. And last but not least, there is a new command line for generating documentation for your projects, which you type a command and it analyzes your project and then generates a graph of the interactions between your providers and your widgets. So all that I've shown you is still work in progress, so it's not available today. It will hopefully be available soon in the future, but that should be quite exciting, right? I also want to thank everyone who contributed to the Riverpod documentation. Thanks to all of your efforts, the documentation is now available in 8 different languages, and you've made tons of PRs for fixing typos and all. That's awesome. And while speaking of documentation, many of you gave valuable feedback on what could be improved for the documentation. And I'm aware that the existing documentation is a bit rough on the edges. It may be a bit not beginner-friendly. So a new website is planned. I have nothing to show you today, but yeah, so I want to announce this new website, and also want to focus on some of the feedback some of you gave, especially on a few points that came a few times. In particular, those following points. So many of you complained about how it's hard to know which provider to use in Riverpod and when to use it, or some of you alternatively say there may be too many providers. Also, alternatively, it's not necessarily clear on why you want to use Riverpod instead of another package like Mobix, I don't know, whatever. And similarly, the documentation lacks some step-by-step tutorial on Riverpod, so beginners don't necessarily know on where to get started. So these are valid concerns, and I would like to see what we could do together on those. So first, about the first point. Currently, we have to use various providers, so like provider, sensitive provider, feature provider, generative provider, tons of them. And I've been thinking about this problem, and I've made an experiment on potentially an alternative solution to remove this problem entirely instead of fixing it through documentation. I was thinking that maybe we could have Riverpod figure out what the provider type should be for you so that you don't have to make this choice anymore. And it would still work the same, but just you don't have to pick the provider. So this new syntax would be the following. It's still experimental, of course. The idea would be you simply would define a function, you would annotate it with @Riverpod, and then you return whatever you want. Like if it's a synchronous function, then Riverpod would be able to know that you need to create a provider. If it's an asynchronous function, it would create a future provider and all. So you would just write normal Dart code, and Riverpod would figure things out by itself. Similarly, if you wrote a class instead of a function, and that class had a build method, then based on the return type of that build method, it would do the same thing. By writing a class, you would then be able to define methods to modify the state, like a state notifier. So this new syntax is based on code generation, and I know what you're thinking. Many of you probably don't necessarily like builder and all, and I understand the concern. Although I would like to note that one of the projects that our team is currently working on is something called static metaprogramming, which is code generation built directly inside the Dart language, which means that in theory, once it's available, the issues with code generation should disappear, but we would be left with all the benefits that code generation brings us. So, for example, this new syntax, although it does exactly the same thing as before, it's slightly more readable, and also it has things you wouldn't be able to do before, like this new syntax, for example, supports stateful hot reload of providers. So if you change the code of a provider, then the IDE suddenly reloads the providers that changed, but not the others that didn't change. That would be very valuable, or debugging would be improved. Lots of valuable things. So I could show you directly how to use this syntax, but I mean, we've discussed it before. We're lacking some step-by-step tutorials and all. So I figured, why not use this opportunity to do some light coding together and build an application that you can see here, pub.dev client, listing the various packages from pub.dev. And it would have basically everything you have in a typical application, like an infinitely scrolling list, and you fetch as you scroll. You have pull to refresh. You have a search bar where when you type, it searches as you type. You have a detail page, and you can go on the detail page and like packages, which you don't see right now, but I mean, you may have seen it before. Yeah. And yeah, so that's quite interesting, right? And to also showcase the usefulness of Riverpod, I also give myself a few handicaps. I want to use a special approach that is empowered by Riverpod. And I'm going to build this entire application, but without using any set state or equivalent. So no notify listeners, no, if you're using valid notifier, no value equals something, which would also consist as a notify listeners. So nothing of this sort. I also won't do any explicit form of error handling in the business logic. So no try catch, no catching errors on streams, nothing like those. Just plain code. Sound interesting? Yeah. Okay, let's get started then. Do you see the screen? Is that anything else? Yeah, okay. So I'll admit that I'm going to cheat a bit. I'm not going to start from scratch for the sake of not having to waste too much time on UI. So what we have right now is just see a simple list view with hard-coded content. You can see it here. It's a predefined list, nothing special in here, no network request. And I can click on it. The title page is also hard-coded. So as you can see, all the information are here. It's just I stripped out all the business logic from here, and we're going to do that together. Same thing, yeah, there is no fetch as you scroll, no search bar, this search bar does nothing. So just really completely hard-coded in UI. So let's do that. So first things first, when you use Riverpod, the first thing you need to do is you need to add in your main a widget called provider scope. Let's do that together. Scope here, which is from Riverpod. Here I'm using host Riverpod. A good card to start. Yeah, so that's it. Now we've enabled Riverpod in our project. So next step, we have our main page. So first thing we can try to do is remove this hard-coded list because it's a bit dirty. Let's maybe make it, for now, let's make it a provider. So we're going to use the new syntax that I showed you a few slides ago. So I'm going to define a function, which I'm going to call packages. and I'm specifying the return type. So that's still a list of packages. I'm just going to take the previous return value and return it from here. Okay. So I need to import the annotation. So let's do that quickly. Paginating. Yes, package. And of course, since I'm using code generation with build runner, because it's currently using build runner, but hopefully once we are metabrain, we wouldn't need this. We need to add this part directive. Again, you wouldn't need this in the future. So yeah, so now I've refactored the hard-coded list into a provider. But I mean, as you can see, we still have an error because now this isn't a list anymore, it's a provider. And obviously we can't do a for loop on a provider. So we instead need to read the provider and then iterate over the result. So for that, what we need to do is we need to, when using Riverpod, we should use a different type of widget. So instead of stateless widget, we're going to use consumer widget. Consumer widget is basically equivalent to a stateless widget. The only difference is stateless consumer widget. The only difference is that its build method has an extra parameter, which is called a widget ref. This widget ref parameter is similar to build context, but it allows us to interact with providers. So now what we can do is we can use ref and do .watch, and we specify the provider we want to read. So here I define the package provider, so packages provider. And yeah, you may wonder if anything changed. And so for that, what we could do is, I told you before that we had a stateful hot reload, so why not add something in here like priest? Well, that's not the correct word, but yeah. As you can see now, I can modify the provider and see you update automatically. If you were to use the previous syntax, this would still show the unupdated code instead. So that's much better. Nice, but I mean, it's still hard-coded, so we didn't really change much. So what we need to do now is make a network request to the pub API. For that, I'm going to import a class that I defined previously, which is the pub repository. So I'm making a provider for creating this class, pub repository. This pub repository class is, if you're familiar with the repository pattern, it's just a plain class which does a bunch of network requests. It's not doing anything, so there is no error handling and all inside. It's just simplifying the syntax for us readers. So just doing a plain HTTP GET and decoding the result. Nothing special in here. Okay, so now that we have created a pub repository, we can obtain it inside our package provider. So pub repository. So to do that, we can once again use this ref parameter variable, so ref.watch, and we once again specify the provider we want to read, so pub repository provider. And now we can return pub repository dot get packages. Of course, it's a paginated API, so we need to specify a page. In this case, for now, let's just hardcode one. And of course, it's an asynchronous API, so this needs to be to return a future. And finally, I added this package class before for the hard-coded content, but now we're using the pub repository, so I'm just going to remove this. Now it returns package, but with the full information from the API. Okay, so I've updated the provider to do a network request, but now we have another error in our widget. This error is voluntary because we've refactored our widget from our provider from synchronous to asynchronous. And so Riverpod is telling you, hey, you need to handle loading states and errors because obviously this is asynchronous. And so we need to handle those. The network request could fail. So let's do that together. First, we're going to define a separate variable. And as you can see now, this package variable is not list package, it's instead async value list package. So this async value is containing either the data or a loading state or the error state, if any. And so we can use this package to perform kind of like a fancy switch case that we can do. And so the syntax for this would be, we take our async value that we obtained previously, and we do something called when, packages when. And then we can return, if it's in error, we return an error text. If it's loading, we return a progress indicator. And so then, if it's data, then we have the list of packages, and we can just show a list view. So let's just show the list view. Okay, of course, I need a hot reload, hot restart. Yeah, beautiful. So now, let's add some extra information, because now we know more about the package than just your name. So let's just add those, the description and the version. So we can see we made an actual query to the pub API. These are real packages. You can check on pub.dev if you want. So the thing is, it's still not paginated. There are obviously more than just 100 packages in pub. I hope so. So we need to handle pagination. So for that, I'm going to show you, for that, let's just first remove this hard-coded parameter. And one thing we could do is we simply, on our function, define a parameter. So required page number, page, and just pass it here. And then, of course, since now we have a parameter on our provider, we need to pass this parameter when we use the provider. So page 1. I mean, I'll have to restart again, but don't worry. Yeah, so we ended up with the same UI as before, but now our pagination is dynamic, so I can change it here. And now I'm fetching page 42. And I can go back to page 1. So now the only thing we need to do is dynamically have this page variable from maybe the list index, because we could use this list.builder for that, or for example. So I'm going to show you a fancy trick to do the fetch as you scroll for that using listview. Listview.custom. I'm going to use listview.custom for a fancy trick because it allows returning null in its item builder. It's like listview.builder, but you can return null here. What this tells Flutter is that when you return null, you've basically reached the end of the list. That's all. So we've made a list view, and so from here, we need to convert this index into something more valuable for us. So like the page index and the item index within that page. So let's do that. So it's just a quick math. We know the page size. Pub use a page size of 100 items, so we just use a quick math for it. Then now we can fetch our page from this new number. So we can just pass this variable here. Once again, we need to handle loading state. So return 1 packages and a semicolon. Yeah. So in here, we're no longer building the entire list view. We're building the item. So we can obtain the item simply by doing from the list, we take the index, packages, item index in page. And then we can return the individual item from the previous code, which I can then remove. Here, return. Yeah. But we still need to do one last thing, is we need to handle the case where we reach the end of the list. And doing that would be a simple if condition in here, where we would check whether the item index is greater than the package length. Package.length, and in which case we simply return null, as I said before. So yeah, now if I scroll, you should hopefully see, if I scroll, yeah, you maybe saw it for a few frames, progress indicator. Obviously, this progress indicator is not very pretty. Let's use something a bit cooler. I'm going to use a custom loading indicator, shimmer. Yeah. So if I do it again, yeah, I see it's a bit nicer in there. Okay, so we have an infinitely loading list. by just defining this simple function, and then our UI can automatically do the infinite list. No need to handle scroll offsets or anything. It's just doing things as you scroll. Nice. But I mean, our detail page is still hard-coded, so let's do that. Let's go to the detail page here. So we're going to do the same thing as before, exactly the same logic. We need to define providers, and then we need to read them. So first, I'm going to convert the detail page to a consumer widget right now, because we're going to do that later. We're going to need that later to get this widget ref once again. And since we are once again going to use code generation for the providers, I'm going to add this part directive. And now I'm going to define a bunch of providers for doing network requests specific to the detail page. Yeah. Let's just add the annotation. So what these providers do, they're performing a bunch of network requests. So in particular, this provider here fetch information specific to a package from its name. So as you can see, it takes a name and it returns the package detail. This one is fetching metrics like the like count, the property score, bug points. And this one is getting the list of all the liked packages for the currently logged in user, which we are not going to cover how to do authentication here. So yeah, so we've defined a bunch of providers. Now let's just obtain them in our detail page as before. So I can watch the provider for fetching details about a package. I can watch the provider for the metrics, like before. And I can also watch the provider for getting the likes. Yeah. Okay, so I mean, right now it's still hard-coded. We're just watching things, but not doing anything with them. First, let's cover the like count, which currently only shows an empty favorite border. So what we could do is we can compute whether the current package is liked or not by checking whether the liked package, the current package, is in the list of liked package by the current user. So equal liked packages dot value contains package name. And if it's not in there, which is freaking false. Yeah. So now I can show, if it's in the list, we show a full herd. Otherwise, we just sort of show the border. But I mean, it's not in here yet, so we still see the border. Now, time to remove this dirty hard-coded content. Like before, we're going to use this when syntax that I showed you previously. So let's just do that right now. So detail one. Let's do the same thing as before. We take the previously obtained values, which are async values, and then we do this when. If it's an error, we show an error text. If it's a loading, we show a progress indicator. And just doing that for both the metrics and the package information. Nothing fancy here. And now we can use those data we obtained to actually render something meaningful this time. So I'm just passing the informations to the UI this time. So yeah, now we actually have real information. Yeah, so yeah, great. Last but not least, we need to do the search bar. Let's go back to the detail page. Well, not detail page, search page. So the search bar, we can continue. We already added a parameter for the page. We could do another parameter for the search query, search. And instead, we could have it default to an empty string. And so now, our provider could check if there is a non-empty search. Is not empty. No, it's empty. If there is an empty search, we use the official get packages API. Otherwise, we do a search API, which is a different endpoint. So search. So yeah, so now I'm using a different endpoint which is fetching a different, you see, API search, and it takes an extra parameter. So this API, it's an implementation detail, but this API only returns the package name of your search, so it doesn't return the description and all. So I'm doing a separate call to, I'm reading the detail providers that we defined previously in the detail page to obtain the description and the versions for those packages. So here I'm using rev.watch to read the provider we defined in the detail page, and then we are going to obtain the extra informations. Ignore the error, it's nothing special, I just need to reload. Okay. And so here now, if I wanted to specify a search, I could simply, as before, I have my page, and I can also specify a search here, like Riverpod. And it automatically does a search for Riverpod. So now the only thing we want to do to handle our search as we type is we need to specify the actual, we need to make the string from the search bar. And so let's do that together. So the typical way of doing it would be to have a text editing controller, which we pass it to the text field from the search bar. And then we listen to the text editing controller, which updates when the text changes. And we'll rebuild the UI with the new text. Let's do that together. For that, I'm just going to use hooks Riverpod instead. So I'm switching to hook consumer widget. You could use a stateful widget for your text editing controller if you wanted to. I just want to showcase it here. So with hooks Riverpod, if you're familiar with hooks, it allows us to use functions that start with the keyword use. And so here I'm going to use text editing controller. Basically, what this does is it's basically an alternate syntax to stateful widgets, where this use text editing controller is basically creating an instance of text editing controller. It's caching it inside the state of the object. And then if somehow the search page is destroyed, the text editing controller would be disposed accordingly. So it's not just like if you call the constructor, it's actually handling properly, releasing the resources and all. And so I need to pass it to the search bar now. And controller. And I also want to handle the case where, because at the moment we just created a text editing controller, we're not listening to it. We could use an animated builder to listen to a listenable. Here I'm just using the hook use listenable, which takes a listenable and rebuilds the widget whenever the listenable emits an update. And finally, the last step would be to remove this string here and pass the controller instead. Yeah, obviously I need a reload. Yeah, so now if I type, then it automatically search directly as I type. Great, right? Yes. So final thing, and then we can maybe move on some more advanced stuff. We need to handle the like count. Yeah, you see the like. I like Riverpod. So for now, we've only just fetched stuff. We didn't do any side effects. So this like thing is a side effect. And I mean, we could do a network request directly inside the on-press, but I mean, we like to extract business logic out of widgets, so we want to do things cleanly. So instead, what we could do is, as I mentioned before, convert our one of our provider, here is the provider for obtaining the metrics, because we want to modify the likes count, and convert it to the class instead. Let's do that. Class metrics. So with this class, the idea is we take the previous function and simply paste it in the class, remove the annotation. The name of the method, it has to define a method named build. And this method simply doesn't take the ref because the class already has the ref as a property. But otherwise, it's the same as before. Like you can define parameters like before, and you can do whatever you would do in the function inside build. So if I save, I mean, technically nothing changed because I've just changed it into a class. But now the cool thing is that what it enables us is within the callback of the button, I can now obtain this class instance by using the following. So first, like for example, if I were to use the previous line here. Yeah, so if I were to use the previous way of reading provider, like here, like passing the get package metrics class that we defined, here I wouldn't get the class instance, I would get the async value for the network request. So if you instead want the instance of this class, what you need to do is, after your provider and passing the parameters, you add the .notifier here. So now this variable returned is an instance of our class here, as you can see. So now what we can do is add a simple future like function. And we can do in here similar things as we do before, like obtain the pub repository we created before, pub repository provider. And from here, we can call the like function and pass the like parameter, the package name parameter, which is the same name as we defined on our build method. Of course, then we need to call this in our button, so like. Yes, but I mean, I already liked Riverpod, so we need to deal with, let's maybe start with unlike first. Unlike. I mean, if I click on it, I mean, for now, nothing updates because we're just making a network request and we need to update the UI. And so how to do that? I could technically do it like before with a notify listener and modifying the state, but as I mentioned, I don't want to do that in this talk. So an alternative solution would be to call something called invalidate on the ref object. So I can do ref.invalidate self. What this does is it tells Riverpod the result of this function should be no longer used, and instead you rerun this function, so it will perform a new network request. It will obtain the most up-to-date metrics. And obviously, when this new network request is complete, the UI will update accordingly with the new result. And I need to do the same thing with the liked package list, because otherwise the button wouldn't update. So I can also do the same thing for the other provider. Ref.invalidate and pass the get liked provider. So now if I click on it again, hopefully it should update. Maybe not. Of course. Let's see. It's a little joy of like going. What is this? Oh, somehow the application stopped. Okay. Yeah, let's start again. Sorry for that. Are you following so far? But now auto-dispose is enabled by default, and the new way for adding auto-dispose is on the annotation here. There's a parameter. So it's I mentioned it's reversed, so yeah. But I'm going to cover that slightly later, so you're supporting us. Okay, let's try again. Let's go to this one instead. So can I like it? No? Oh yeah, true. Some of you are following. Yeah, true. Notifier.like, and I do the other one. And so yeah, the like logic is basically the same thing as the unlike, so I'm just copy pasting it and changing the name. Like, we could technically refactor it, but who cares? Okay, yeah. So as you can see, now I can like and unlike things. Yay! I mean, it's great so far, but what if we went a bit further than that? Because that's too simple. We can do a few things. For example, we could do like in our UI, yeah. Like currently we're on the Go Sell SDK Flutter package. Let's go there. Go Sell SDK Flutter package. Yeah, and so if I like it here, our UI doesn't update. And I'm not using WebSockets or anything. So, I mean, I want the most up-to-date value. So one thing we could do, for example, is to do some HTTP pooling, like refresh the result every 5 seconds, for example. That could sound complex, but in Riverpod, it's actually fairly simple. What we could do is first, let me do a bit of refactoring. Package equal, well, matrix. And return me. Sorry. So yeah, just remove the return. And so the idea would be to, because as you've seen, we can invalidate the provider to say rerun the function when it's invalidated. And we could do the same thing here by, for example, simply adding a timer of, say, 5 seconds and call invalidate self. So what it would do is in 5 seconds after the network request, because we've avoided it before, it would simply rerun the provider again. And if somehow the provider was refreshed before, then we cancel the timer because we don't want to refresh it twice. So now I just save. I'm just going to make a hot restart just to make sure. Go here. Yeah, I mean, well, you see that errors on the because yeah, somehow the API of pub somehow fails on some packages. I don't know why. Which one is it? Artemis Cops. Artemis Cop. So here it's technically now refreshing every 5 seconds. So here there is no lines in here. But if I like it, hopefully, yay. And I mean, last but not least, while we are at it, what if instead we did some pull to refresh? Because why not? Pull to refresh is actually fairly simple. Let's go to the search page. And we want to refresh the list of packages when we do a pull to refresh. So in Flutter, this widget called refresh indicator. So I'm just going to use it here. On refresh. So it basically expects a feature that resolves when the refresh is complete. So what I'm going to do here is I can do, once again, the same logic as I showed you before with this invalidate function. So I can invalidate the paginated API that we fetched before. So this provider, and I'm going to invalidate it here. Package provider, just passing it here. So this will destroy all the pages. And then I'm going to return a feature that resolves when we fetch the first page. So let's do that quickly. So we can do that by doing the following. Let me take this. Yeah. So let's just take the first page because we only care about the first page now. We are at the top of the list. And so instead of the result, we want to obtain the future from it. And this future would complete when the network request completes. So let's do that. And now I can fetch it. I mean, if you want to publish a package, we would see it here. Yeah. I'm out of time, so that's it for me. Hopefully with this live coding, you should have seen now that with Riverpod, you can do a different way of building applications. You can just focus on doing your network requests and building your UI instead of having to handle invalidating, handling error, updating cache and all. Yeah, that's it for me.